And thanks everyone for joining us today for our first reform webinar. My name is Rarica Zbranka. I will moderate today's session. I am program director at the Cluj Cultural Center. Cluj Cultural Center is an NGO based in Cluj that has as a mission to support sustainable development through culture, and it has more than 100 local organizations and institutions from the fields of culture, as well as universities and municipality as members. So we are working in part of our mission is to support the development of the cultural sector. So this work is coming into our interest, on one hand, in investing in the future of the cultural sector, and on the other hand, it is part of this project, which is called Cluj Future of Work, which is multi-annual initiative supported by the urban innovative actions of the European Union, which is looking from different thematic perspectives at the challenges of the labor market in different fields, one of them being culture. We have started 1 year before with the research on the socio-economic conditions of cultural work in Romania. And we are now getting into this second phase where we are starting these sort of conversations to see what type of challenges we need to face in the cultural sector, how to become more sustainable, more responsible. And we are also offering through this program a few seed grants for local organizations in the cultural sector, independent organizations that are willing to try experimental practices to innovate the way in which they are working, with this aim to become more sustainable, more responsible, more fair, more inclusive. Our guests today are, first of all, Pascal Gielen from the University of Antwerp, who is a professor of cultural sociology, who is going to speak about the artistic biotope, and he is our keynote today. After his keynote and responding to some of your questions, Pascal is going to leave because he has to teach classes today, but we are going to continue with the panel with Milica Ilić, with Marijana Rimanić, with Dirk de Wit and Sofie Joye, from all of us connected through previous experiences, through the Reshape project, a transnational project that has been exactly looking into the needed innovations in the cultural sector. The first part, it is Pascal's keynote. Then we are going to have these panels. After each of these parts, we are inviting you to ask questions and have a short Q&A session. This is an artwork that has been part of an exhibition at the Center for Contemporary Arts in Rotterdam, and it has been displayed on the streets of Rotterdam for many years, and it speaks about not having necessarily the need to glorify labor. With this, I will pass on for good the microphone to Pascal.
Thank you, Rarica, for introducing me. It's nice. This picture resonates with the former picture about who hates the job, and this artist wants any job, whatever. But first of all, thank you for inviting me. And also, I want to say as a remark before I start talking that you invited me to talk about something I'm talking already a long time. Almost for 20 years, I think, 20 years ago, the first time we developed, together with my colleague and at that moment my supervisor, Rudy Lagermans, also a sociologist in Belgium, started to develop this biotop, but it evolved afterwards. So 20 years ago already, it evolved, and it is based on several studies. Meanwhile, we started in the research started where the biotop is based on the visual art field in Flanders, so part of Belgium. Then we did again the research, the hybrid artist was called a report in 2011, where we interviewed a lot of visual artists again, who studied starting from the 70s until 2000 in 3 countries, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And again, we did it, the research, I think in 2016, in all over Europe. We interviewed more than 1,000 creators, so not only any more visual artists, but also opera singers, ballet dancers, but also people in the more commercial creative industries, architects, filmmakers, etc. And basically, we asked them the same question. And the question was, it started in the past with the question as, what do you need to develop a successful career on the long run? What is needed for that? And successful was defined in a very broad sense. So not only in an economical sense. You mentioned already that you said we are interested in the socio-economical thing. Yes, we were also interested in that, but also a more and broader thing, what makes, on the long run, was our question, creativity sustainable? And one of the first conclusions of the research was that it's not only has to do with financial things or economical things at all, it is one part of it. So to go very blunt, the answer to, and straightforward, the answer to this question of those artists, we could generalize afterwards in an answer to that they said they needed 4 domains, or 4 fields, let's say it like that. We called it themselves afterwards the domestic field, the field of the peers, the market, and the civil space. So artists, creators answered most of the time that they needed those 4 spheres. One is the domestic sphere, it's home, it's a studio where you can work most of the time isolated, reflect about yourself. So it's also a place of experiment, research, and development. And it has some, let's say, values or rules which are important to follow in this space. For example, rituals and tradition. Every morning drinking 3 cups of coffee before you start working, before you start painting, for example, to say traditional art form, or to start dancing, etc. So it's a space where you can have your own time. This is very important, to organize yourself. And the basic relationships are the relationships of intimacy, trust. A lot of artists, some artists said that when they only allow that their partner or a good friend, their lover, can come in their studio to visit. And also that when this partner says that this work, what he or she made, could not see the world, that they destroyed it. This is a real space where you only allow people who can play also the role of gatekeeper to the outside world. The outside world can be the world of the peers, but also the civil world, public space, museums, etc. So this is domestic space. The second is the peers. The peers is, I always, we saw it also in the interviews, the first time that artists meet the peers was most of the time at an art school. And in an art school, you develop other kind of relationship. It is a relationship with professionals most of the time. And the relationship is not so much based anymore on respect. There is still respect in the peers, like in the domestic sphere, but on evaluating. So what I mean by that is that
everything what you can say. Also, when you go for a beer with your teacher after school, you know that everything as an artist what is said can be evaluated. And that's in fact a professional relationship. When you talk with colleagues in the art field, or with the curator, or with a museum director, or a critic, of course, you know that everything what you say can be evaluated, every idea you share, etc. So it's another kind of relationship you build up there. It's based on knowledge and also the art historical canon. A lot of interviewees mentioned this in the research that they said it was for the first time that I learned the art historical canon. So also to relate my own work to this canon and to the knowledge and to the main references in my own discipline, my own field. What is important also in the peers that you can negotiate and have to even negotiate and discuss your own position, your own individual artistic identity in it, in discussion with other peers. So also this is an anecdote with one artist mentioned in the classroom. He said, in the classroom I was painting, my teacher came in and my teacher said at a certain moment to me, "Oh my God, what you are doing, Van Gogh was already doing 100 years ago." And then I said as a student, "No, I'm doing something else." And then the discussion starts. So it is really relating you to art historical canon, to knowledge about trends, about what is happening in the art field, what is interesting in the art field at the moment, and trying to position yourself in this. This is the peers. I think domestic sphere and peers are the most important for research and development, self-reflection, and so on. But when you want to make a living of it, you need to earn money, and then you need to go to a market. And a market we define very broad. A market can be also a subsidizing system where you get subsidized by a government. But for me, the main characteristic of a market is that you can exchange your artistic products, your artistic activities for money. So the main exchange is based on the exchange of money. So again, it can come from government, contract-based, or it can be in free market position. So, but the main regulator is money there, and a very important quality of the market is that you learn to quantify yourself. You learn to count how much a thing costs to make, how much time you need to make something, and you learn to ask for a price for the work, what you're doing. But the market system is not so much on evaluating, it's about competition. So relationships are based on competition. Even in the subsidizing system, you know, when you get a grant as an artist, maybe another artist who applies don't get a grant. So there's always a situation of competition. Yeah, say one thing about Adam Smith. We all know Adam Smith, and he promoted very much a free market as a model for a general society. But also even Adam Smith said that to have a good functioning market, you need also places which are safeguarded from the market, so which are not under the rule of the market. And he mentioned two. Healthcare system cannot be privatized and be part of a market system, because then the market system itself fails. And the second was education. You cannot organize and privatize education, because then the market system itself will fail. And keep this in mind, is for me very important. It's also a legitimation to say that we need separate spaces from the market, like the domestic sphere, the peers, and the last one, the civil sphere. What's the civil sphere? I think the civil sphere you can define as a space where you can develop as an artist public support for your work. And also to say it in general terms, where you can make your artwork, which can be very idiosyncratic and which can function very well in the peers. You can try to make in the civil space, and only in the civil space you can try to make it there, culture of it, a shared culture that people like, even a national culture, that they say this artist or this art is from us. It is our national culture is part of it, but it can be also of a community, etc. So representation is very important. The quality of the work related to a broader culture, also for laymen, people are just interested in the kind of art, etc. So it's as a public value. And this is generated mostly in debates, arguments in public space. Can be public museums, can be in the media, etc. Still, two remarks on this biotop. Of course, you see, first of all, that there is a kind of chronological logic in it. Most of the artists start when they are young in the domestic space with a blank paper or a white paper where they start being creative on, try things out, etc. Then they go to an art school, to the peers, and then they try to get a position on the market or in civil space. So there's a chronological logic in it, but a lot of artists, also very successful artists we interviewed, for example, the Belgian artist Luc Tuymans was one of them we interviewed, who's very successful. I think at this moment you can buy a painting of Luc Tuymans only for, what is it, $1 million or something like that. So he's very successful, but one of his main complaints in the interview, what we interviewed, was that he missed enormously the peers and the domestic space because he has no time anymore to go there. And especially he missed this because he said, yeah, this is the only place where you can develop again your work, innovate your work, find new ideas, etc. And being too much in the civil and the market space can be killing for your own inspiration and your own creative work. And that literally, it sounds a little bit like cynical or maybe as a joke, but it was awful that we saw a lot of, in our interviews, we discussed a lot about their precarious situation, the financial situation, but also their mental situation. And we see in, especially a lot of successful, especially opera singers, but also visual artists, who are successful at a certain moment when they are successful 10, 15 years, they get a burnout, get depressed, start drinking a lot. It's a typical disease in this field, and the typical thing of precarity we discovered in this field, which is a cliche and well known, of course, but we saw also the real reasons for that. And the reasons for that was that they stayed too long in the market space or a civil space. It's one of the reasons, of course. So you need those four spaces. So there needs to be a balance between those four spaces. A last remark about the biotop is that we also discovered that until the 70s and even until the 1980s, so the 80s of the former century, those spheres were protected collectively by institutions. For example, the domestic sphere was protected by the institution family. And we see that what happens in the 70s, the end of the 70s at least, and in the 80s, those institutions of collective protection and defending of those spheres also are deconstructed. For example, we see, starting from the end of the 70s, a lot of divorces, one-parent families, etc. So you see a kind of deconstruction of the institution family, which means also that the responsibility to keep going on and to go back to the domestic sphere becomes more and more the individual responsibility of the artist itself. Okay, this is the biotop. So again, people, artists who want to be creative need those four spheres and need to find a kind of balance in it. What happens, and I use this metaphor, what happens starting from the 80s, I said already there is a kind of deconstruction of those institutions. For example, also of public institutions like the museum in the civil sphere, but also of the university, the art school in the sphere of the the peers. What happens is that starting from the 70s, the world became more and more wet and flat again. What I mean by that is that people don't. Let's start by that to analyze why do I use this metaphor and what do I mean by this is that we see in this period from the 70s on to 2000, let's say it like that. So in 30 years, 3 parallel shifts on different levels. And they made, in my eyes, what I call the world flat and wet again. What means flat and wet then? That more and more what is important is that you experience yourself, but also organize yourself on an individual level as an artist freelancer, for example. That means when you organize yourself in such a way that you need to be networked, need to be connected to get assignments, to find a job, etc. And most of the time, temporary project-based. This is what I call post-Fordist. Not I, it's a typical term in sociology of labor, post-Fordist labor. So that means the development starting from the 70s or the deconstruction of fixed contracts, contracts for life, having a position, for example, in an art school for 40 years, to a more freelance-based situation, on which you live also more and more on your own creativity and which is project-based. That's the second shift I describe here from Fordist labor to post-Fordist labor conditions. But also on the political level, you see a shift, and of course it symbolizes in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that you see a kind of deconstruction of the political arena, where we go to what Chantal Mouffe calls a post-political situation, in which there is not quite or not clear, at least anymore, opposition between left-wing and right-wing, and wherein you see a development as what we call nowadays neoliberalism as a main or a general system, which is also infecting socialist parties, communist parties, etc. For me, it starts in the creative field when Tony Blair, at that moment Prime Minister of the UK, embraces Bono of U2, then the start of the creative industry policy, and the shift from a cultural policy to a creative industry policies becomes more and more the official policy of governments. And that's when this collapse of ideologies plays a very important role. It's the Labour Party, literally, who embraces the free market system for the cultural field. And we see also in the same time period from the 70s and to 2000 that museums of contemporary art rises, or they change their name from Museum of Modern Art to Contemporary Art. What is important in this shift is, again, that especially the word contemporary says it on its own. Contemporary means that you look in the contemporary, that you don't look to the future, but also not anymore to the past, to develop your work less and less. And you see this literally also in the 70s, you see in the visual art field, the booming of so-called independent curators. What do independent curators do? In the first place, they look left and right. They look not to the sky anymore and to dig deep. They look to what others are doing in the world to define their own and to develop their own artistic identity as a curator, etc. So it's literally looking in the contemporary, so not to the future, but also not anymore to the past, to develop your own artistic work, etc. So this is happening in this kind of a world which was in the past, certainly in the 19th century, built up in a vertical way. It becomes more and more horizontal and flat. And at a certain moment, you see a lot of artists freelancing. They really are surfing on the net from project to project, searching for assignments, projects, contacts, etc. So what we see in this flat world is, and that you could foresee already, is a kind of, in a way that the market takes over those other spaces. And again, a market is not a problem as such. The problem is when a logic of a market, especially the logic of quantification, becomes part of other value regimes, other domains or spheres. For example, I take only one example in it. In the peers, in the art schools, literally you saw the development, the popping up, first of all, of cultural management courses, creative industries courses, etc. And what you learn in such courses is to quantify your creativity, but to quantify already before you start be creative. I just give one blunt example in an art school where I worked, at Flanders School of the Arts in Tilburg in the Netherlands. There is a famous academy for rock artists, and the rock artists learned in the first lesson of creative industries that, for example, a pop song can have only 3.5 minutes or 4.5 minutes, and that you need 3 references in it and a reference in it and not more. So you learn already before you are creative to learn to think in a kind of format with functions on the market. You learn to quantify yourself. And this is, so as such, learning to quantify yourself is a very important quality to survive as an entrepreneur on the market, but it becomes problematic when it becomes also a rule in the peers, in the domestic sphere and the civil sphere. And it becomes, this is for me very interesting, and I can make the loop again to Adam Smith, what I said before. It is also problematic for the traditional functioning of a market, even an art market itself. For example, what you see nowadays, that people start to manipulate or download illegal things. So you see piracy. This is blocking the market. It's fighting with authorship members, for example, that artists also still get money for the creative work they made. It dysfunctions the market. Creative industry, more interesting, I think, when you learn to think in formats and you learn to look like curators, for example, what others do to define your own identity, your own artistic identity, but also your own creative products on the market, you get this whole interesting mechanism of what the American sociologist DiMaggio called competitive isomorphism. What does this mean? To develop your artistic work, you want to distinct yourself from others. You want to make a distinctive position, make something new. So you look to the others, but that means also that you mirror the others, and that the distinction you make is not that big. There's not so big difference between what you do and other artists do. And that you see nowadays, certainly in the visual art field, when you go to visit biennials, you see a lot of the same art, even when it is from other artists, etc. That has to do because of this highly competitive organization in which you try to distinct yourself, but you also mirror the others in your own work. And the last thing is what we see with cultural industries. We see the chains of the Guggenheim Bilbao's, which arise in this field. You see kind of tendency to monopolize, and a monopoly is also blocking the market, is problematic or can be problematic for a market. I think this is the system in which we are functioning now. Or malfunctioning or bad functioning at this moment. This is the condition, certainly after or which came to the front or became more visible, I think, with the crisis of 2008, and all the responses to that have to do with this problem. So question is, to go quickly, but I hope I still have time to answer some questions, is what can you do? How can you respond to this? And then we come to this whole idea of constituting a cultural commons. Maybe first, very briefly, a definition of what commons is. But first of all, we see a kind of new fashion starting exactly after 2008, that a lot of organizations, artists, cultural workers, cultural organizations try to reorganize themselves to survive. To survive the financial crisis, and then the word commons comes in. But it was also an answer to a lot of artists we interviewed. We asked them, what do you need to survive nowadays? And they said most of the time two very important things, which I remember they say, first of all, we need entrance for free to need inspiring resources, so that we don't need to pay for everything what you can use, and also that you in a legal way you can use it for free, and to make your own things from. This is very important thing. So that was a very important complaint. We need some more spaces and more resources we can use for free. But the second, maybe more important, is we need again, and what we are missing a lot is trust relationships. And that is what you see in a market system where everybody is in competition with everybody, even in an art school already, where there is a competition, a huge competition organized by the school system itself in between students. You get a collapse of trust, but also that means a collapse of the basis to develop creativity. For example, to dare to try out a new idea, to share your idea or your concept, which is still not maybe well developed, with others, is very important to stimulate a creative process. And that's what we call commons, sharing information, sharing ideas, etc. And this is yeah, a very important thing what people need. This is built up not by state anymore, but by civil society. People who want something, who want to share something, they try to organize this sharing of resources in a common matter. Also in the market itself. For example, it's a beautiful example, Common Easy is it called. It's a security company in the Netherlands. They give insurances for free. So you can get as a freelancer there an insurance. How it works, you can look up commoneasy.com. It's the link where you can find this organization. But they organize, so for example, an alternative income when you get ill, etc., for free. Yeah, it's possible. Those commons organizations also function, and there is, of course, a lot of people in the artistic field, especially freelancers, are willing to do this, or are so looking for this kind of common shared spaces. An example of common knowledge in the domestic sphere could be, for example, a common organization we all know, Wikipedia, right? Which shares knowledge for free in this space. Having said this, what you see in this model is also that I think we never can go back to the first scheme with beautiful, separated, institutionally defended spaces. No, this is all blurred by the market, but also, I hope, in the near future, on a tactical way by civil space, in which you get a space which is quite hybrid, and where you need to negotiate in a tactical way again and again this common position, even in a market situation, like, for example, this Common Easy private security, or not private security, but commons security organization. And exactly in this COVID time, this is a thing where we are working on. At the moment, this is a research proposal we applied for with the European the European Research Commission. And in this, you see all this dimensions come back. The focus is here precarity, but what you try to make clear is that precarity is a kind of multidimensional thing. It is, you can have artistic precarity, you can have a social dimension in it, which has to do with social security I talked about, but also with cultural policy, with your self-organization, which has also an individual dimension. And what we see nowadays more and more, mental diseases, deconstruction or problems of physical health. And I think when we want to understand precarity, but also the opposite, sustainability or resilience in this field, you have to take the whole picture of it. This remark comes from an answer of my question, because a lot of people ask me after this lecture, yes, do we have to organize then again political art or something like that? And I give the answer by the artist Thomas Hirschen, who said, I'm concerned with making art politically. I'm not concerned with making political art. So it's not about, and that's my point, it's not about making art with a activist art or political art with a political message. It can be, it's not the point, but it is to rethink how you organize your art, even when it is minimalism, when it is a white canvas. It is about how you organize it in society nowadays. And that's a political act. And I think more and more also at art schools, we need to learn again to organize ourselves in a society, which is a political act. Let me stop by that. If there are still questions, I still 5 minutes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pascal. For me, this is always very inspiring. We have 2 questions.
Okay.
First of all, the first one is, did you discover a discrepancy in this flat and wet world between the Western and Eastern Europe? If so, how can you characterize the situation in Eastern Europe? That's the first one. Do you want me to read the second one too, to have an idea? Yeah. The other one is there a way of transforming the flat and wet world back to a vertical perspective? For example, by empowering the deconstructed structures like family?
Sorry, the last one I did not quite understand. So
probably the question here is if you think if it is desirable to go back to a more vertical world from this flat, wet world, and if yes, what would be the way to this? Yeah. And the other one, it is about if there is a difference between Eastern and Western Europe in these terms, in this dynamic that you mentioned. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, there is a huge difference between Eastern Europe, also the Balkans, and Western, let's say it, or the north of Europe, let's say it like that, it's better. And also between south of Europe. Most of the commons organizations nowadays we see in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans especially, and in Spain and Italy. When we talk about Europe, but most of them are in South America, and we learn a lot of them for Europe. But it is popping up also in Northern Europe, and I think I discovered, at least in Spain, I cannot speak of all the countries, but why are they so strong and better organized in Spain, for example? That is because there is, since Franco already, a huge distrust in the state. People don't trust the state, and they have the feeling immediately that they have to organize themselves in a different way. Can be also that the government is corrupt, etc. So they don't trust politics anymore. And that's also the reason why I think that also in the Northern Europe at this moment, more and more common organizations are popping up because they don't trust, or less and less are trusting the state or governments in general, which is related to the development of populist parties who in fact
make a kind of view of or feeling of distrust in the government in general. So yes, there is a difference in developing, but it is growing also in Northern Europe. But I think the whole energy comes from South Europe, Eastern Europe, where we see much more this much more explicit politically thinking of your cultural work is much more developed in Eastern Europe than, for example, in the Netherlands or in Denmark. There's a huge difference in that. Second, do we have to go back to verticality? That's a tricky question. No, that's not the idea. I think let's say like that. Historically seen, there are two projects. I don't know if the name project is a good word, but two developments of horizontalization. The first started in the 70s with the kind of idea of democratization of culture, that everybody needs to participate, that also different cultures need to have a place, multicultural society, community art is raising at that moment also. So this is a very important idea of horizontalization as democratization, which is a beautiful thing. Yeah? So it's not against this kind of horizontalization, what I'm talking about, but what you see is this whole movement of democratization is Gramsci calls it détournement. It is taken over by a neoliberal market system, and then the world comes flat and wet, and that's a completely other kind of horizontal dimension, which fakes that it is horizontal, but is in fact very vertical organized. And it's based, of course, about the possibility to have economical resources that new verticalities are developed, or that you can develop monopoly, like I mentioned already. So I definitely want not to go to this verticality anymore, also not the classical bourgeois verticality to the sublime, etc., in the art world, etc. But my main question, as part of our research, is if you organize culture as a commons, and I mean that you say that the culture we have is for free for everybody, is shared, it's a common good. When you define culture like that, then the question is, can you build from this ground back a kind of very interesting for me verticalities? And this sounds abstract, but what I mean by this verticalities is means that you build up new kind of quality art, what we called quality, with different characteristics, but which has authority. I mean authority because it has to say something to a culture. Yeah? It communicates to a culture, and or that this kind of idiosyncratic art can become a quality for a broader culture in the civil space. And this is for me a new kind of verticality. It's really getting authority, but supported by, let's say blunt, by the people, a broader community, etc. And I think commons organizations can organize this for us. It's accepted authority, and we need authority. We need also leadership. We need this, but based on this common ground.
Well, this is a lot to think and work with. Thank you so much, Pascal.
Again, that's also the reason why I mentioned this whole, I call it the COVID-19 research. I think it is really the moment to rethink our cultural structures, etc. So I'm very curious at one side to get knowledge about what is happening everywhere in organization, but also I'm finding ways to get support, but also to support and to share knowledge. And I think we really have to develop such a kind of platforms, common platforms, in which this knowledge can be shared to each other. So it's much more, for me, it's very important. This is much more than just giving a lecture. We have to get rid of also this kind of idea to work with each other. And it's very important to do also research together, to change information and to really to build up and to construct other organizations. I'm so tired of sitting only at the university, you know. This model is over. It's done. Also for the university, I think, and also for academics and researchers. It's very important, I think, to develop this kind of new infrastructures which can function, but also of which you can make a living from.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Now, I would like to move on to already discuss about some projects and that have explored these perspectives of thinking the work in the cultural sector from a different angle to try to become more inclusive, to become more sustainable, ask the right questions and bring the right people together. And one of such examples is the Reshape project that actually I would like to invite Milica Ilić, who is a senior officer at expert at ONDA in France, who is the organization leading the Reshape project to speak a little bit about it. And then Marijana Rimanić, who is in a bit of another corner of Europe, in Croatia, in POGON, is going to join Milica in this conversation. And I would like to ask them to speak about Reshape. Why was Reshape needed? How did it happen? And what are maybe the main ideas that you see emerging from this type of discussion as, let's say, as ideas on markers on our way, which way to start innovating?
Thanks, Rarica. I'll just very shortly thank you for inviting me. It's absolutely always a pleasure to be in spaces like this, and even more so with a few faces that I know and recognize. So that's always really nice. I've participated in a few of these discussions about transforming the art sector, especially in COVID and hopefully post-COVID days. And probably one of the most stimulating was a lab, the Lab of the Absent Body, which was organized this summer by Miki Branište, who is also here. So some of the faces I'm recognizing from that discussion. And so I got really excited about being here because I know that the discussions that you guys are having can be very stimulating for everybody in the sector. So my name is Milica Ilić. I work at ONDA, which is the French Office for Contemporary Performing Arts Circulation, so based in Paris. I am myself based in Brussels, and actually I coordinate this project, which is quite a transnational kind of European/Mediterranean project. So this is where I sit. I actually, what we talked about with Marijana, who will introduce herself in a minute, is that we'll go the other way around. So Marijana will present Reshape as a project, and then I'll be talking a little bit more about its results and current, at least, findings. So maybe over to Marijana first.
Thank you, Milica. Rarica already introduced me. My name is Marijana. I work in POGON, which is Zagreb Center for Contemporary Culture and Youth. And in Reshape project, I'm in charge of communication, and basically communication is the field that I operate in the most. I will try to present what Reshape is and what we are doing in the framework of the project. And actually Pascal's lecture is, I would say, a perfect framework or a perfect introduction to Reshape. We try to, with the Reshape, we are basically trying to find answers that Pascal posed. I'm not sure if we are successful in that. We will see. But I think that it is important for sure that we not only think on what kind of art are we making, but also, as Pascal said, how are we making art. So in that sense, Reshape is trying to make some kind of proposals, basically to reshape the artistic and cultural field. But to start at the beginning, Reshape stands for Reflect, Share, Practice and Experiment. And it's a research and development project that brings together both organizations and individuals, art professionals from Europe and South Mediterranean to, as I mentioned, jointly create innovative organizational models and reflect on concrete answers to crucial challenges related to production, distribution, and presentation of contemporary art practices. Reshape is basically a 2.5-year long project. Now we are in its final stage. And it was conceived by 19 partners from Europe and South Mediterranean. And this territorial scope was chosen because of, on one hand, because of many disbalances in opportunities that characterize this area. So, as mentioned, working, for example, in Balkans or in South Mediterranean doesn't offer the same type of opportunities as working in the Western Europe. But at the same time, this cultural field is still connected. We still collaborate with each other, and we create somehow a wide cultural circus. So we are not so much disconnected from each other, although we have very different conditions. Also, besides that, working in culture means working cross-sectorial. This is a very dynamic field. It's precarious, it's innovative, and it's often the avant-garde of social change. So we kind of felt the profound need to reshape the institutional and organizational framework in which we are operating, or to be more precise, to adjust this framework so that it corresponds more to what is happening on the ground, what is happening in the field, and to change it bottom up. Now a little bit about how this project is organized very shortly. At the beginning of the implementation of the project, we gathered, Reshape gathered 40 reshapers, which are professionals active in the cultural field that are either interested in alternative organizational models or are already implementing some, or both of that, actually. We gathered 6 facilitators and 4 advisors who joined their forces in rethinking the arts and culture field through 5 major topics or 5 major challenges that we detected are present in the arts and culture field. So reshapers and facilitators, together with advisors and partners, gathered in 5 groups, and we were discussing the following topics. So one was, or one is, art and citizenship, and we were trying to answer the question, or we were inspired by the question, how can art radically imagine new forms of citizenship and empower us to act? The second topic is fair governance models, where we are inspired by the question how to think, shape and perform different models of organizing in arts and culture, so they reflect values of equity and sustainability while remaining open, dynamic and resilient. The third topic is value of art in social fabric, answering to a question how to encourage understanding of and promote the value of art in social fabric. The fourth topic is solidarity economies. How can solidarity encourage the vitality of contemporary art across funding context? And the fifth topic is the transnational and post-national artistic practices, where we are thinking or rethinking how to practice and reflect transnational artistic activities in current socio-political context. And of course, this topic has shifted tremendously throughout the project, especially with the outbreak of coronavirus. So through the series of 3 workshops, in which groups met individually, and through 2 intensives, which were working conference, one of which would happen in Cluj, reshapers and facilitators delved deep into these 5 topics in order to find concrete, realistic, and sustainable answers to those questions. And this might sound as very ambitious, and as in many other fields, it was quite hard to find solutions, especially ones that would be concrete, realistic, and sustainable. And to do all of that without coming with even more questions, or with finding even more topics that we should kind of deeply discuss. But we came with some proposals that can serve to both policymakers and to both us as practitioners as guidelines in making a shift, be it a simple shift in our everyday professional practices, in our organizations, be it more radical paradigm shift, or be it a shift in institutional and policy framework that would respond to the needs of the practitioners in the field. So this is our ambition. We are now at the stage that we are finalizing these proposals or these solutions, and we are going to, or we will try to promote them widely. And Milica, I would invite back Milica to join and to actually present or tell more about the solutions that we imagined so far.
The idea is also to summarize somehow the results of a process that is still ongoing. So it's very complicated to do that. I actually don't have all the data yet on what is coming out of Reshape, because we are really in a phase where ideas are emerging and kind of becoming concrete. And also it will take some time to put them all together and kind of analyze them, because we're talking about many different ideas from many different people. I can say that there is an overarching or a very clear red thread in all of the ideas and all the reflections that are coming out of Reshape, and that is connected to a deeply felt and experienced crisis, a feeling of crisis. So throughout all the ideas that we're getting, the acknowledgement of crisis is very clear. A crisis which is, of course, coming from the pressures from outside, and we've been talking about this, and I'm sure we will talk about it some more, of economic and political and social crises that influence our sector, but they're also coming from within, from the inside, from a number of unsustainable practices that we are engaging in, and which are not only not sustainable, but also disconnected from the values that we represent or wish to represent as a sector. So the crisis is urgent, and it's deep, and it's felt by all. And this is another affirmation that I think it's important in this particular context, that it's felt by all, whatever the type of structure or whatever the position of relative power or lack of power the organization is having in the cultural landscape. So this is really something that is felt across institutional and non-institutional settings. And as a result of this deep feeling of crisis, there is, in all of these ideas that are emerging, there is a sense that tweaking little details or making small arrangements or providing small adjustments is not going to be enough, and that what is really needed is a radical and profound paradigm shift. So most of these, or actually all of these ideas that we are getting now are inscribed in a place that would be provoking this radical paradigm shift. So it's really about rethinking a different world, and then kind of creating conditions or small provocations for that world to emerge. It might sound as a utopian idea, but that's where we stand. And this new world is really constructed out of a set of values that keep on reappearing in all of these ideas that are emerging from the project. And these are values of equity, of equality, of diversity, of empathy, solidarity, security, and ecological awareness. So these are somehow the ideas that are transversal to all the prototypes and all the proposals that we're getting. And so if this is this new world that the actors and activists involved in Reshape are imagining, then what they imagine is for their practices, for our practices, and for our organizational models and our institutions to be adapted to these values. So this is the shift that they are looking into, that we are looking towards. And this includes also economic models, which need a radical transformation, going much more towards commoning, towards degrowth, towards inclusiveness, and towards respect to broader ecology. So what we have now, what the invitation actually to those actors that are participating in Reshape was, it was to give us or imagine or propose sustainable, realistic, and concrete solutions to the challenges of the sector today. And what they come up with, knowing that this is the new world that they are describing or that they are drawing, what they come up with are very different and very diverse ideas and reflections. Some of them are very poetic, some of them are very concrete, some of them are extremely broad, and others are very precise, dealing with very specific topic. Some of them are inscribing into a necessity of breaking down the existing system, and others are more looking towards building up a new system. So they really place themselves in very different stages. But they are all somehow possible pathways and possible tools to use in order to support the emergence of this new reality or this new world. And I will just give you a few examples. One of them is a blueprint of a house which is filled with a massive amount of questions, which are all describing and all related to an extremely extensive mapping of crisis that an art worker is carrying on his shoulders. And these questions are there in order to provoke a different kind of behavior and a different kind of reality. Another one is a treasure box of rituals, rituals that one can take upon individually and apply them in their daily work and daily life in order to decompose the existing archetypes and archetypical behavior and create a possibility of new ones. Another one is a model of financing projects that are created by artists that are in an underprivileged position. It's called the solidarity tax, and it's actually a way of a coalition created by privileged institutions and actors in order to support projects that are less privileged. And it's not only looking at breaking down privilege, but it's also looking at acknowledging that there is privilege and that it carries with itself responsibility. So there are many other ideas, and I won't tell you much about it because they're really in the state of kind of creation and incubation right now. But what I can say is that these ideas are, of course, full of imagination, and they're full of poetry, and they're full of playfulness. A lot of them are actually in the form of a game, and they are really based on a feeling of the necessity of collaboration and connectivity. And then I can conclude by saying that they are just sparks. They are just possible pathways, and it's really possible doors or possible windows to a new reality. And then what we would really need after this whole reflection is finished is for you guys to take those ideas and then to build on them and to shift them and reshape them and make them yours, and then try to make something out of it, so that in all of these reflections that we're having, that we would come up with something that would be a common movement rather than just ideas floating around.
Thank you, Milica, and thank you, Marijana. I would like to now pass on the mic to Sofie and Dirk to continue this type of sharing of already existing projects, looking into possible ways and measures to support this innovation in the way in which we work in culture. Sofie and Dirk, they work for the Flanders Art Institute, and this is one organization that has been investing in this topic for a while now. So Sofie, we're just passing to you. I think you can share the screen.
Hi, my name is Sofie. First and for all, it's really an honor to be here today and to be able to speak to you. And to share with you some of the initiatives that we have been working on and the tools that we have been working on concerning fair practices. I work, and Dirk, my colleague as well, works for Flanders Art Institute. We are an interface organization and expertise center for the arts from Flanders and Brussels. And an important part of our work at Flanders Art Institute is to stimulate development of the field and its transition towards more sustainable work and new organizational models. One of the initiatives we have been working on in the last couple of years is Do It Together. It started in the spring of 2017, and it is a 2-year trajectory to reinforce the position of the artists in the arts world today. It's an initiative that was undertaken together with diverse players in the field and consisted of several phases. But in the first phase, together with the Ghent University, we collaborated on the analysis of, it's called Does Passion Pay Off? It's a study of the socioeconomical position of professional artists in Flanders. And the answers provided shed light on what we already know now is a precarious socioeconomical reality of artists in their atypical work environment. I think Pascal already mentioned it. The typical multiple job holding, the simultaneous execution of different jobs in and outside of the arts is by default for the majority of professional artists the reality. But we, after the analysis and different things that came out of that, we also wanted to work further and go further and play an active role in changing this precarious position and reinforcing fair and sustainable practices within the arts. So in the second phase, we launched an open call for ideas in the idea of sharing common knowledge and sharing from each other. And the idea was, with this open call, to reinforce and jointly reinforce the position of the artist by not doing it ourselves, but doing it together. And 41, I think, ideas emerged from this call from diverse players of the field. Who had ideas concerning fair payments, but also the sharing and exchanging of resources like workspaces, networks, or knowledge through digital platforms or physical locations. And also the reinforcement and reinforcing of initiatives of self-organization, artists organizing themselves, but commonly. What happened next after all these different ideas were pitched? We invited actually applicants with likewise proposals to come together and further develop their ideas in peer review sessions. So they actually developed their own ideas, but they got some coaching from us and also got coached by peers, by other artists or art workers who were also developing ideas and could share their knowledge. And in this way, we try to form new coalitions between various experiments and building bridges between the different ideas. And ultimately, this you see, I think here, I don't know if you see my arrow, but ultimately we spent a year working with 4 initiatives that were selected. One of them was engagement, which is, maybe you've heard of it. It's an artists' movement and campaign that charts sexism, power abuse, and sexual harassment in the Belgian art world. It's a community of artists that set up a platform and also a safe space for peer support. And they work both digitally as live, so they have meetings. And they started in the wake of the Me Too movement. One of the other initiatives was 51%. And the objective of 51% is that more paid functions in the art sector should be carried out by professional artists with an active arts practice. In this way, it opens up more opportunities for artists to make a living, while also securing a voice from the inside within the arts world. That's the proposition you see with the building and 51%. Another initiative was from State of the Art, which is a self-organized artist collective based in Brussels, who published a Fair Arts Almanac. And the Fair Arts Almanac is actually offering a collection of practical information, statements, ideas, testimonies, tools. It's a guide, it's a calendar, if you want to say, a sort of notebook with contributions, ideas, and tips from about 50 artists to you as an artist. Those actually were all initiatives that were really artist-based, and there was one initiative from a group of 4 arts organizations that was called the Coalition. And what the Coalition did in this trajectory and worked on, and is still working on, is they closely examined their own operations and are enacting concrete changes towards a more fair practice in their own work, in their own institutions, but they're in being reinforced by each other, thus by peer support. And what was interesting with Do It Together, and which was also one of the goals, was that we not only supported several individual initiatives, but established connections. And I think that's also an important part of this whole, or had been a big part of this whole initiative. The building of alliances, which is, as we all know, crucial when working towards system change. And in this initiative, we took the time to further develop these seeds of change into tools for practices of change. So that's what we try to do with Do It Together. And one last initiative that I also want to mention is this fair. It's a conversational tool to raise awareness and share values on fair practices in the arts. In Flanders, a lot of organizations are working towards fair practices, and OCO, the Federation of Arts Organizations, launched What's Right is Right. You see it there at the left side. It's a picture of the website, actually. It's a sort of fair practice charter and toolbox formulating fair working principles for which arts organizations, but also art workers and artists can express their commitments. Right is Right. It consists of 2 parts. It's a guiding framework containing general principles and agreements, but it's also a toolbox which has different instruments that all in the sector can use. And what we did next to what right is right, is we supported this by developing a conversational tool called Is This Fair? What this tool did was it selected fictionalized but real life cases of unfair practices and brought people together to collectively discuss and renegotiate these cases to make them in a way more fair. Our focus in this was to raise awareness and indulge this shift from current attitudes and practices of unfairness towards a more fair practice in the arts. The idea was actually quite simple. In this conversational game, if you want, art workers, programmers, and policymakers came together around the table. And each table could only start the discussion if these different perspectives were gathered at the table. So you needed an artist, an art worker, and a policymaker. And the task was easy. The task was discuss this case that is put in front of you and analyze it together. What could possibly be fair and what could possibly be unfair aspects of this case. And what's interesting here is that people who take up different roles in the arts production were present, and they were obliged to take into account each other's perspectives and scopes concerning the case. So by actually flipping the table and looking at the case from another's perspective, all of the parties gained new insights. First, they had to agree on what were the unfair aspects in the case and had to negotiate how to make these cases more fair. And by doing this, they also had to think about, okay, but in my position, what can I take up? What is the active role that I can take up in shifting from these unfair practices to work towards a more fair way of working? And what was interesting to see is that some of the tables who worked on the same cases had very different outcomes on what they said or thought to be fair and unfair practices, while actually different perspectives were there on the table.
That's great. Thanks a lot. If you can all go back to Slido, you have one question running. Using one word, what is the biggest challenge that the cultural organizations are facing? And you are invited to write your one-word answer. So we have already one answer, which is inertia. It's what we have to fight. Inefficiency. Nervousness. Monetization. Politicking. Insecurity over production. And then there's one more question that that we have for you, which is, what policy measures do you think are most urgently needed? And we will also open this one. All right, thanks a lot. For the final moment, I would like to invite you all to open your microphones and just be noisy and let's say goodbye to each other.
Thank you, Rarica, for
Thank you.
hosting
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
Make the world a better place.
Yay.
For artists too.